Hey everyone, now let's talk about Agile Project Management, or more specifically, what is Scrum and how do we implement Scrum methodology in our projects. Let's get started. You've probably seen this diagram before. It represents all elements you need to know about Scrum, but it might look a little complicated right now. Don't need to worry about it. I'll come back to it by the end of this video. For now, let's break this awesome diagram into smaller components and understand it a small piece at a time. And I promise you'll find that it's a lot simpler than it looks. First, let's start with the main element of the Scrum methodology, the sprint. See, the project is broken into small chunks called sprints. They are a short period of time, usually 2 to 4 weeks, in which all activities needed for the implementation of the sprint features are performed, from planning, developing, testing, and reviewing the product. Now that you know what is a sprint, let's move on to the Scrum skeleton. The Scrum skeleton contains 3 main categories: Scrum Roles, Scrum Artifacts, and Scrum Ceremonies or Meetings. Let's get started with the roles. In Scrum, we have 3 roles. The product owner, who represents the customer. It's like having the customer with you every day to ask them what they want from the product. The product owner is responsible for defining the requirements or the user stories and prioritizing and estimating them in the product backlog. He or she is also the person who accepts or rejects the work at the end of each sprint. Then comes the Scrum Master. You can think of the Scrum Master as the project manager of the team. They make sure that the Scrum process is implemented correctly and they work on removing impediments and roadblocks. And lastly, the Scrum team. And they are the people who do the actual work to deliver the product. Note that the Scrum team consists of developers, designers, architects, and testers. Now let's talk about the Scrum Artifacts. First, the product backlog. It is a prioritized and estimated list of the high-level product features that were identified by the product owner. Note that this is a living document that will be updated throughout the project as more requirements are realized. Then, the sprint backlog. Before each sprint, during the sprint planning meeting, the team decides what goes from the product backlog to the sprint backlog. And these are the tasks that the team has committed to complete during this sprint. And lastly, the burn down charts. These are charts that show the team progress throughout the sprint. They are updated by the Scrum Master on the daily stand-up meetings. Alright, let's move on to the Scrum meetings. And I'm sure by now you've noticed that we have already mentioned 2 of them, the sprint planning meeting and the daily stand-ups. Scrum has 4 types of meetings. They are called Scrum Ceremonies. First, the sprint planning meeting, and this comes at the beginning of each sprint to plan for this specific sprint and create the sprint backlog. Then comes the sprint review meeting that occurs at the end of each sprint to demonstrate the completed parts to the product owner to accept or reject the work. Then the retrospective meeting. In this meeting, all team members provide their feedback on the past sprint and work on making continuous improvements by asking 2 main questions. What went well during this sprint and what could be improved in the next sprint? Number 4, the daily stand-up meetings. They are daily 15-minute meetings to ask 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What is planned for today? And if there's any roadblocks. And they are called stand-up meetings because they are meant to be fast, no more than 15 minutes, so everybody should be standing up during this meeting. Okay, now let's bring back the diagram from the beginning of this video to see how the full picture works. The product owner works with the customer to define the product features and requirements and create the product backlog. Then the team conducts a sprint planning meeting to select what they can commit to deliver by the end of the sprint and create the sprint backlog. Then the sprint starts, where the Scrum team design, develop, and test their work. Every day in the sprint, the Scrum Master facilitates a daily stand-up meetings to define the team's progress and remove any roadblocks. The Scrum Master also updates the burn down chart to represent the team progress in this sprint. Then at the end of each sprint, the team meets with the product owner to review the work completed, and the product owner accepts or rejects the work. The rejected work goes back to the product backlog, and the accepted work goes to the finished work. At the end of each sprint, the Scrum Master facilitates the retrospective meeting to reflect on the past sprint and improve the next sprint. Okay, now that you understand how Scrum works, and hopefully you loved it, I recommend that you consider the Scrum Master certification. It will prove the most valuable to your career. The good news is, we created an online Scrum training that prepares you to pass the exam from the first time, and it's completely free. I'll be there to mentor you step by step until you get your certificate. I'll see you there.